So let me share my screen here, and we're going to say a blessing for study, and then we're going to launch into a kind of an unusual discussion. Is everybody seeing my screen? It shows the blessing for study. If you'd like to unmute, you can join me in saying the blessing, or you can stay muted and say the blessing with us. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is the one whose mitzvot, whose commandments make our lives holy, and who commands us to engage in, to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. So before we get started, let me just invite you to put your name and well, I guess your names are all in here already, but put your location into the chat. That way we get to know who we're studying with here. And I always like these Zoom chats because we can study with people from all over the place. The name of our program today is Helping the Rains to Flow, Environmental Wisdom from the Shema. And so I only partly on purpose started with a discussion about weather. But of course, already in our informal discussion here, we've touched on weather and air pollution and sickness. And of course, these are all, matters of great interest in our world today. Now, at first blush, the Shema is a funny place to look for environmental wisdom. Judaism has a great deal to say about the environment and the earth, and some of us have studied together and looked at some of that. But why would we look at the Shema to find something about the environment? And that'll become clear, hopefully, over the course of the next hour. The reason for this discussion is that today is Tu Bishvat. Tu Bishvat is the 15th day of the month of Shvat, and it is Judaism's environmental holiday. Tu Bishvat is colloquially called the birthday of the trees, and less colloquially, it's a new year for tithing. Traditionally, in ancient times, a new year for tithing, a new year for first fruits, and so it became over the years, and especially in modern times, a day to think about our connection to the earth and the ways that our Judaism teaches us to connect more deeply with the earth. And so in terms of Judaism, there's no more important or more central place to start than the Shema. And I want to read the Shema here. When we talk about the Shema, we usually are talking about one line, Hear, O Israel, the eternal is our God, the eternal is one, or the eternal alone, when I'm highlighting here. The Shema is actually 3 paragraphs long, traditionally recited twice a day. I want to start by reading the first paragraph, the one that we probably know as the V'ahavta, and we'll ask ourselves why we would say that every day, and then we're going to move on to a less often recited part of the Shema, which is where we're going to find our environmental wisdom, hopefully. So you probably are all familiar with these words. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the eternal is our God, the eternal alone, or the eternal is one. And then the Shema goes on to tell us various ways that we can love God. You shall love your eternal God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol between your eyes. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now that's the paragraph we call V'ahavta. It is the central message in many ways of Judaism, because it's about God's oneness. So looking at this, let's just try to figure out, and maybe it's obvious, why would we say this twice a day? What is it about this paragraph? And you can either put it in the chat, or you can unmute, raise your hand, and I'll electronically if possible, or just, wave at me like this. Let's try to figure out, what is it about this paragraph of Shema that we would say it twice a day? What does it lend to our lives that the rabbis would have ordained however many, centuries ago, that we should be reciting this daily, twice a day? Jocelyn, go ahead.
Well, the repetition aspect is important because I don't think they wanted us to forget it. If you only said it once, it's easy to not take it to heart, and you want to frame your day with it too. Like, this is a practice that I've tried to take on myself as far as like mitzvah goes, because it frames your day and reminds you of what our job is as Jewish people. And then at the end of your day, you can reflect and say like, okay, how well did I do these things? How well did I um convey the oneness of God and make it known and relevant in my home?
Great. Yeah, so I like that language of framing our day. The Shema provides structure. You say it in the morning, you say it in the evening. And Jocelyn, I like what you're suggesting. I can look back over my day. I don't know how many of us actually do that, but in theory, you can look back over your day, think about how were my actions in line with my values this day. If this paragraph represents, excuse me, values or commitments or something like that, then it's meant in many ways as a mnemonic device, right? To remind us of something. Gabriel puts into the chat, it is the pact that God said when God got us out of Egypt. So its importance is a direct rule from God. It reminds us of our freedom, and it reminds us of relationship with God. I think all these are really important points about the Shema. Any other thoughts? Why would we say it twice a day, or what does it do for us to be repeating this passage? Ira, go ahead.
It's almost like burning those neural pathways between your mind and your soul and your heart. You need to keep telling yourself to do these, to make this connection with God. It's not just how did I do today or what. It's also reestablishing that connection. We do it once a week, we do it once a year, we can do it twice a day.
Great. If I can, what I think I heard you say is it puts responsibility front and center for us regularly, right? The responsibility here to God and the responsibility to our values, it puts it front and center. So here we have a ritual in Judaism where, as Ira points out, the purpose really is regular reminders of what we expect of ourselves. And depending on how we understand God, what God expects of us in the world. Now, I want to turn to the second paragraph of the Shema. Now, if you grew up in a Reform congregation, which I did, or if you're still part of a Reform congregation, this paragraph may not be familiar to you because it is not part of the Shema in the Reform liturgy for reasons that we'll get into in a moment, or that might be obvious as we're reading this. But the Shema is actually a 3-paragraph compilation, including what we just read, as well as this paragraph, and a third paragraph that's about tzitzit, the fringes on the corners of the clothing. So I want to read this middle paragraph of the Shema. And then the question is really, what does this add to the previous discussion? What the Shema was doing? It's a little longer. Can I actually get a volunteer to read this paragraph for us? Like I said, my voice is not the very best. Carol, thank you. That would be great.
If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving your God, Adonai, and serving God with all your heart and soul, I will grant the rain for your land in season, the early rain and the late. You shall gather in your new grain and wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. Take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them, for Adonai's anger will flare up against you, shutting up the skies so that there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that Adonai has assigned to you. Therefore, impress these my words upon your very heart, bind them as a sign on your hand, let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, and teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up, and inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that Adonai swore to your fathers to assign to them as long as there is a heaven over the earth.
Great. Thank you, Carol. So this middle paragraph in some ways sounds familiar, sounds similar to the first paragraph, right? Loving God with all your heart and soul. Um, this whole part at the end, impressing the words on your heart, binding them as a sign on your hand, let them serve as a symbol before your eyes. There's a lot, write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. There's a lot that's very similar to the first paragraph, the V'ahavta paragraph. But also there's a whole new section here, which essentially says, if you follow my commandments, God says, then I will cause the rains to fall, and I'll provide enough grass for your cattle, and you'll have enough to eat, and everything will be fine. But if you don't, then God's anger will flare up against you, and there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce, and you will soon perish from the land. And of course, land here with a capital L, I know there's no capital L in Hebrew, but the translator did this on purpose because this refers specifically to the land of Israel, right? So there's a new message here, which is if you follow my commandments, then things will go well for you in the land. You'll get to stay a long time. And if you don't follow my commandments, then things will go much less well for you in the land with a capital L. You will not get to stay for a long time after all. So, okay, now given the second paragraph, how does this part sit with you? Is it a theology that you agree with? Is it a passage that you're interested in reading on a regular basis? And furthermore, what does it add to the first paragraph? Why would this be instituted as a daily recitation in Judaism?
I'm trying to understand. I'm sorry, I spoke
No,
out.
go ahead, Carol, go ahead, and then Ira.
I'm trying to understand why it has been omitted in Reform Judaism. It's beautiful.
All right. Well, as we'll see toward the end, it's actually come back in a way. Carol, what is it you find beautiful about this paragraph?
Plus, it talks about real stuff like rain and growing things and wine and oil and cattle and all the things that are necessary for life.
Okay. All right. So there's some real stuff here, right? The message is, and the reason I think it was omitted, which we'll see in a moment in a little more detail, is this idea that if you follow my commandments, then you will be rewarded. And if you don't follow my commandments, you will be punished. It's a very sort of transactional reward and punishment kind of theology here. Ira was next. Go ahead, Ira.
When I first read this, and I think this comes from Deuteronomy, right?
It does, yeah. Both of these paragraphs come from Deuteronomy.
I took offense with it because it's so transactional. It's like fear-based. It's like, be good or else I will punish you. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was kind of saying, I'm giving you the earth and you need to take care of it. And the way that you can take care of it is to follow my commandments. And if you don't, these things like bad things will happen that affect the weather possibly. And, you will do these things to yourself, not necessarily I will do them to you, is what I take on it.
That's interesting. And in some ways, Ira, a very 21st century way to read the passage, because of course, what it says in its literal text is, I will punish you. I here being God, right? If you don't follow my commandments, I will punish you. And Jocelyn in the chat just said this is a throwback to your fire and brimstone days. I can see that. This has a bit of a fire and brimstone kind of feeling to it. And I find challenging the notion that, if something goes wrong, if I get sick, it must be because I'm being punished. If I don't have enough food, it must be because I did something wrong, right? If someone is hungry, if someone is homeless, God must be punishing them. I think that's the danger. That's the potential offense of this. But Ira, as you're hinting, there might be another way to read this. And in fact, if I can preempt a little bit of where we're going to, a more environmental way to read this. I see Evelyn, and then I see Carol. Go ahead, Evelyn.
Okay. When the Tanakh was written, they didn't, God had to have anthropomorphic features and all that. But I guess what I care about is we are created in the image of God, and we have a responsibility. Like if I'm a farmer and all I want is money and I'm going to buy artificial fertilizer, I don't care if the people get sick, all this. That's not God speaking. That's me. And so if God is all important with me, I will do things that will automatically prosper everyone and make the world a beautiful place.
Yeah, Evelyn, I love how you brought this back to the idea of responsibility, right? Because what we find at the heart of the Shema, of both of these paragraphs and of Judaism in many ways, is the language of commandment or responsibility, right? In Judaism, we are responsible to God, to others, to the world. And so ultimately the language that we're reading here and what we recite daily is a language that reminds us of how we are responsible to the world around us. Carol, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment that the fire and brimstone aspect is found all through the Torah. So I wouldn't, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I like the emphasis on the environmental aspects.
Fair enough. So one of the things that the rabbis notice when they read these two paragraphs is that there's a difference in emphasis. In the first paragraph of the Shema, the one that we read first and that many of us are used to reciting or chanting in our Reform synagogues, or certainly also conservative and Orthodox synagogues, this is in the singular. I don't know if people here read Hebrew, but when you say ve'ahavta, you shall love the eternal God, that's singular to you as an individual. B'chol levavcha, with all your heart, and the cha at the end there means your as an individual. In this second paragraph, it refers in the plural. So it says here, b'chol levavchem. I'm from New Orleans, so we would say with this means with all y'all's heart, right? All y'all's heart, all y'all's soul, all y'all's being. So this second paragraph here is addressed in the plural rather than the individual, which already gives us a sense that there's something different going on here. The minute God starts in the Torah starts talking about rain flowing and things that happen with there being enough food, the language shifts to talking to us as a community. And the commentator Rashi noticed this. Rashi is the commentator par excellence on the Torah. He lived in 12th century France, and Rashi comments on the entire Torah and pretty much the entire Talmud. And he notices this difference. He says, hasn't Moses already admonished us to love God b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha, with all your heart and all your soul and all your might? Rather, this was an admonition addressed to the individual, and this, the second paragraph, is an admonition addressed to the community. So we have certain responsibilities that are individual on us. As Jews, we're responsible to, do mitzvot and build a certain kind of Jewish life as an individual. But there are also certain responsibilities that are on us as a community. And the minute the Torah starts to talk about things that have to do with weather and food and the land, it talks to us as a community. It talks to us as a group. Now, when some of us read this, we felt challenged by the liturgy, by the theology of it. And I think, some of you called it fire and brimstone. Some of you, we talked about transactional nature. We talked about the reward and punishment aspect of it. And for that reason, I have here, these are pictures of pretty old Reform prayer books. For that reason, this paragraph got left out. Round about 1850, Jews start to look at this paragraph and they start to say, I don't believe the world works that way. I don't believe that if I get sick, it is because God is punishing me. I don't believe, as we said before, that if someone doesn't have enough to eat, it is a punishment from God. It is because of something that they did. And you know, the kicker to this argument in many ways is the Holocaust, of course, because how could we possibly say something that sounds like those who suffer and go through terrible things are being punished by God? In the wake of the Holocaust, in the wake of this horrific loss of life that clearly has nothing to do with anything we did, it's not a punishment from God, and to say so would be obscene. How could we possibly recite a paragraph that says, if you follow my laws, I'll take care of you. And if I'm not taking care of you, it must mean that you didn't follow my laws. And so Dr. Richard Saracen, who was actually my professor of liturgy at rabbinical school, points out that this is problematic. He said, if God's commandments are obeyed, the rains will fall in their proper times. Disobedience, however, and particularly worshiping other gods, will be punished by drought when God locks up the heavens. And he says the radical reformers in the 19th century, we'll skip the paragraph, the parentheses there, viewed this paragraph as both theologically and scientifically problematic. Weather conditions do not respond to human behavior, on the one hand, nor does divine providence respond to every human activity in such a direct fashion. I just want to highlight that paragraph right there, that sentence right there, because this is the thinking of 19th century Jews who excise this. They say weather patterns do not respond to human behavior, and divine providence, meaning what God does to us or for us, does not respond to every human activity in such a direct fashion. Direct fashion meaning you do follow my laws and I'll take care of you. Don't follow my laws and I won't take care of you. And for that reason, this paragraph gets excised from liberal Jewish life. It is not found in early Reform prayer books. It gets taken out and replaced with in the Reconstructionist prayer book. And we have here 4 different early-ish Reform prayer books. This is from the Hamburg Temple in Germany, 1819. Here you have what's called Olat Tamid, which is the original American Reform prayer book, written by Rabbi David Einhorn in the 1880s. The Old Union prayer book in both its what does it say there? 1895, and this is probably the 1945 edition. None of these prayer books, as well as the one that I grew up with that was published in 1976 or so, none of them contain this passage, because it's so obscene to think that if there's punishment happening, it must be, or if there's suffering happening, it must be because God is punishing us. Or if there's not enough rain, or if there's not enough food, it must be because God is angry at us. But I think the question I would ask you is, how has the world changed since 1850 that might change how we respond to this paragraph? And again, I'll highlight this paragraph, this sentence here, of weather conditions do not respond to human behavior on the one hand, nor does divine providence respond to every human activity in such a direct fashion. How has the world changed in the last 150 years that might change how we respond to this, how we think about this, how we think about Judaism and about the world in general? So I see Amy, and then I see Bob.
Climate change has definitely had an effect.
Yeah, so I don't know that you can say weather conditions do not respond to human behavior anymore, because they so clearly do in so many ways. Bob, were you going to say the same thing? Yeah, and I'll just somebody put the same thing into the chat as well. There are other ways that the world has changed over the last 150 years as well. The world has gotten smaller in many ways, right? We have a greater understanding of the way that the world works, of our own capacity to affect the world, and I would say of our own capacity to destroy the world. In a way, I don't think that the rabbis living 1,500 years ago, or whoever wrote the Torah living 2,500 years ago, ever imagined that humans could destroy the world. I don't think that they imagined that human beings had the capacity to bring about widespread destruction to the world. But we live in a world where that's different. Evelyn, go ahead.
There are studies, secular studies today, that are finding the power of people thinking something. They can make it happen. There was a woman, Agnes Sandford, and she was an evangelical Christian or something, but she prayed all the time, and a lot of things you would consider miracles happen because of her faith. And if you get into a room and you can feel the vibes, you know, if you go someplace where people are fighting and scrabbling and everything, you're not comfortable. You feel that. You don't know what it is, but there's something that bothers you. So we do have a way of influencing living beings with the world.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. You know, we have this incredible power, both in a micro way, in a spiritual way, and also in, you know, very big macro ways. And Bob just mentioned Oppenheimer in the chat. I mean, talk about the ability to destroy the world, right? Our relationship to the earth in the 21st century is different than humans have ever related to the earth, which changes the way that we read the Bible. It changes the way that we read the texts that have been passed down to us over the course of the last 2,000 years, including this text. So where our ancestors, and I mean our 100 years ago ancestors, read this and said, it's obscene to say that if you follow God's commandments, then the rains will fall, and if you don't follow God's commandments, there won't be enough food. That's obscene because it suggests that our suffering is the direct result of, you know, of God's anger. We might look at this differently, as several of you have hinted. Ira, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think it's in Deuteronomy. There's something about you have to allow the land to rest every so many years or something. And so even then, maybe they didn't imagine humans being able to control the weather, but they somehow knew that if that we could destroy the ability to create food or something.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point, Ira, because what Judaism did have and does have and has always had is a concept of stewardship, right? What you're describing is a requirement of stewardship. You know, in ancient Israelite law. Sorry, one second. I have to let my dog out of the room. Talk about nature controlling humans. We know who's in charge around here. Um, so, you know, what ancient Judaism does say, as Ira has just pointed out, is that you have a responsibility to take care of the earth. You don't just own it. You need to let it lie fallow every however many years. Because as the Torah says, the earth belongs to God. The produce belongs to God. It's a gift that's been given you. It's something that is you are stewarding, but it's not just yours to do whatever you want with. And I think that for ancient people, that had implications for your individual field, maybe even the land of Israel, right? If you steward the land properly, God will let you live on it for a long time. But as the world has gotten smaller, our understanding of the world has shifted to a more universal understanding. So here I want to turn to a text from Dr. Shaul Magid, um, who's a contemporary academic and Jewish thinker, and he writes. This is an article. It's actually in a book that I happen to have here next to me. It's called "The Sacred Earth: Jewish Perspectives on the Environment or on Our Planet." Really well written series of essays put out by the Reform movement in the last year or so that looks at various environmental issues. And Dr. Magid's article is called "What If the Earth is Alive?" His basic premise here is that we need to shift to thinking about the Earth as a living being, not necessarily just as a place we live or as a place that we have dominion over, which is what the Torah has often said, but rather the Earth as a living being that we are part of. And he quotes here Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi is the founder of the Jewish Renewal Movement. Jewish renewal, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a kind of a liberal feminist Hasidic Judaism, essentially. Zalman Schachter Shalomi was a Chabad uh, shaliach who found his way into the liberal Jewish world and founded a very what I would say is a form of Hasidic Judaism that is liberal and feminist. And so there's a great deal here of thought about, well, we'll see what he says here. Zalman Schachter Shalomi essentially suggests that there have been two major shifts in the way that we see the world. He says the two major paradigmatic shifts in his lifetime. The first encompassed the Holocaust, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. He writes, terrible as the Holocaust was, the nuclear arms race threatened the Holocaust 1,000 times bigger. For the first time in history, we were faced with the possibility that all peoples, not just ours, might be annihilated, and by our own hand. This was perhaps the greatest challenge to Genesis 2:15. Genesis 2:15 tells us to work the land and keep the land. So the greatest challenge now is our capacity to destroy the planet in a way that we never imagined was possible. We never thought humans would be able to destroy the planet. Turns out we can. This is the Oppenheimer that somebody put into the chat earlier. Now humanity has developed the ability to destroy it, to make the planet uninhabitable, to obliterate that which we have made. The second shift, which he calls a seismic aha moment, was the vision of the Earth viewed from the moon. He writes, to me, the sight of our Earth from outer space is not only a scientific triumph, but today's most potent religious icon as well. More than I want to talk about Avodat Hashem, serving God, I want to talk about serving the planet. So these two moments, for Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who's this founder of Jewish Renewal, he says that these two moments reshape everything about how we look at the world. And I want to ask you to respond to that notion. How does the knowledge that we can destroy the world, let's start with on this side. How does the knowledge that we can destroy the world change how you feel about your responsibility to the world? Any thoughts on that? I'll suggest this. I'll suggest that previous generations had no concept of a responsibility to the earth. They had a concept of a responsibility to God. And they had a concept of a responsibility to God that would keep us in the land of Israel. But I don't believe they exactly had a concept of a responsibility to the earth, because they didn't believe it was possible to harm the earth. Robert, you said our ability to destroy the earth is Promethean, or like Frankenstein. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think the notion that it was possible for humans to have a godlike power precedes this with the myth of Prometheus. The gods gave him fire, and then were punished. He was punished for that.
Yeah.
And then that motif happens in Frankenstein, where she gives life. That was something only God was supposed to do. But Frankenstein creates a living being, which is superhuman and also has the potential to destroy the earth. He doesn't. He's a vegetarian. He just wants to have a mate and a mom. But so we've seen the motif before, I think.
Yeah, the idea of playing God, right? Prometheus is an interesting connection, because of course Prometheus gives fire to human beings, takes something that belongs to the gods and gives it to human beings. And so, in a sense, the ability to give life, which is what Frankenstein is, and the ability to destroy, these are godlike powers, right? And that humanity, what do they call it, or what do they say in Spider-Man, that with great power comes great responsibility, and that the ability to destroy the planet is, of course, the greatest power and brings about the greatest possible responsibility. Carol, go ahead.
I'm trying to redeem myself. When I said I liked that passage, I talked about the environmental stuff. And I read into it that we are obligated to take care of the land. I let the other stuff about if we didn't, we were going to get whacked for it and so forth and so on, go totally by.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't really believe that. I don't think anybody post-Holocaust at my age of 80, 86, I certainly don't believe that. So I'm retracting. I'm going back and saying I didn't buy the whole thing, folks. I bought the emphasis on the land aspects.
Right, and on the responsibility. No redemption needed, because I think it's a really valid way to read the text. Whenever we read text, we're always interpreting text. So let's turn to our other photo here. This is a very famous photo. It's called Earthscape. Earthscape is a photo that was taken by the first astronauts on the moon. Let me ask you, Zalman Schachter Shalomi said, I quoted him a moment ago, he said, "The sight of our Earth from outer space is not only a scientific triumph, but today's most potent religious icon as well." Looking at this photo, how is this photo a religious experience? What does this photo say to us, shift for us, do for us as human beings and as beings in relationship with God? Julie says it's humbling. Julie, any chance you want to tell us a little more about that?
There, I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not so familiar with Zoom, so I'm kind of poking my way around. It's just so small and so compact. There's no detail to it that we see when we're here. And so our detail that is our everyday life is not even visible from this point of view. So we're very small.
We're very small, and our planet, which feels so big, right? It turns out we're all just on this little thing, this little planet, this little globe together. And Gabriel adds in the chat, we're all in this together, and this is our only home. Ira, go ahead. What do you think?
Along the same lines, the word holistic came to mind, like seeing the forest through the trees, like we're not individuals, but all in this together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it somehow, when you see the world from a distance, you see something different than when you sit in the middle of the world and look up, where it looks so big, it looks so wide. But the idea that we're all in this together, it's much harder to think about, my relationship to the land of Israel, one land that God's going to kick me out of, if I don't follow the laws, versus a different land. When you're looking down and realizing that this is all part of one larger whole. And Gabriel also points out it gives us a wider perspective. It gets us out of our ego. I think that's a really fair point. And so Zalman Schachter Shalomi's response to this is, he says, as Jews, part of our mandate as human beings and as Jews is to protect the planet, not a lifeless object upon which life exists, but a living thing itself. There is a sense in which the earth is a thing of which we are part, not a place that we get to have dominion over, but a being of which we are part. We are part of this larger being called Earth, which in some ways means we are part of this larger being called God. And our responsibility toward God then becomes responsibility toward Earth, which becomes responsibility toward all other living things. It says here, ecology is not a nice practice, but a theological mandate that serves as the foundation of the Jews and humanity's covenant with the Creator. And so for that reason, what we're finding more and more is that over the last couple of decades, there's been a return to that passage from the Shema, to read it in the way that Carol was wishing to read it. I know, Carol, you said you wanted to redeem yourself, but the truth is that your original reading of that is very much an environmental reading. if we look upon the earth as a place to which we have responsibility, and we understand our incredible power to cause damage or to prevent damage to the earth, then we will maybe think differently about what it means when when it says that God will cause the rains to flow based on our actions. So I want to read you an interpretive reading of that paragraph. Here, let's go back and just look at what the original said. It says, if you obey my commandments, then I will grant the rain for your land in season. And if you don't, essentially, then God says, I will shut up the skies and the ground will not yield its produce. So remember, the ancient reading of that is, essentially, if we worship God properly, then God will take care of the land. And if not, God will not take care of the land. But here, this is from Rabbi Richard Levy. Rabbi Richard Levy died a couple of years ago, unfortunately. May his memory be for a blessing. And he was the dean of the Reform Rabbinical School in Los Angeles. And this poem actually is in the newest version of the Reformed Prayer Book, which is now about 13 to 15 years old or so. And apparently, so I mentioned before Dr. Richard Saracen, who was my liturgy teacher, he told me that there was actually debate about whether to put this paragraph back into the prayer book as people begin to read it more and more in an ecological sense. And it was decided not to. Actually, there's a little quote about it here. It was decided not to because the theology in the plain sense of the text remained too problematic. However, this reading, this poem, is an interpretive version of that paragraph, which interprets the reward and punishment ideas as being about our responsibility to the earth. And could I get a volunteer to read this poem for us? Amy, that would be great. Thank you.
If we can hear the words from Sinai, then love will flow from us, and we shall serve all that is holy with all our intellect and all our passion and all our life. If we can serve all that is holy, we shall be doing all that humans can to help the rains to flow, the grasses to be green, the grains to be golden like the sun, and the rivers to be filled with life once more. All the children of God shall eat, and there will be enough. But if we turn from Sinai's words and serve only what is common and profane, making gods of our own comfort or strength, then the holiness of life will contract for us. Our world will grow inhospitable.
If you'll go on a little more, please.
Sun was invisible. Yeah, right. Thank you for helping it grow. Let us therefore lace these words into our passion and our intellect, and bind them as a sign on our hands and eyes. Let us write them in mezuzot on our doors and teach them to our children. Let us honor generations that came before us, keeping the promise for those yet to be.
Great. Thank you, Amy. So let's see if I can make this a little smaller so we can get the whole thing into the screen here. I know it's a little small, but let me get your reactions. How does this poem, this reading sit with you? What do you believe is being mandated here? And how do you understand the responsibility that we have as Jews toward the earth? Ira, go ahead.
I think the key here is that the solution to saving the earth, they're telling us, is to follow these commandments. Because if we follow all of these commandments, then the earth will be okay. And if we don't, it probably won't.
And in an ancient context, I think the commandments had to do with worshiping God and keeping kosher and things like that. But I suspect that Rabbi Levy means something different here. When he says if we can hear the words from Sinai, then love will flow from us. what is the commandment that we're being asked to hear here?
The Torah.
I think it has to do with understanding ourselves as part of something larger. If I can read Robert's note here, the past and future generations are part of the eternal, which we are bound not to violate. So I think we're talking here about the notion of understanding ourselves as part of something larger, a larger whole in the sense of being part of this earth, and also a larger whole in the sense of our connection to past and future generations, right? The responsibility to those who will come after us. If we can serve all that is holy, what does it mean to serve all that is holy? I think it's, again, what Robert just put into the chat, this notion that we have a responsibility to something larger than ourselves. Serving all that is holy means that knowing that we have a responsibility and an ability to do what we can to help the rains to flow and the grasses to be green. And at this moment in history, more than any other moment before us, we understand that we actually have that capacity to help the rains to flow and the grasses to be green. As I look out my window here in Canada and note that the snow is melting for the third time, and although I'm happy when the snow is melting, I also know that means that the temperatures are rising, right? So I understand that serving all that is holy means recognizing that what matters here is not only my own needs and wants, but also the needs and wants of something much larger, of the people and the other creatures with whom I share this planet, and the people and the creatures that will come after me, which is, of course, the opposite of serving only what is common and profane, making gods of our own comfort and power. Let's respond to that passage a little bit. What does it mean when he says, serving only what is common and profane, making gods of our own comfort and power? Carol, go ahead.
What I find interesting is that I have never heard this at any service I have ever attended, ever. That's why I went to find it in my copy of the Mishkan Tefillah.
Did you find it?
Oh yeah, it's right there. But it's not ever brought up. In fact, nothing about the environmental issues seem to be drifting into my congregation at any rate.
Well, so you can go talk to your rabbi and say, hey, I heard this passage is in here. Can we bring it in? I mean, truthfully, part of the reason is because it's right there after the Ve'ahavta, and we usually just chant the Ve'ahavta and move on, right? This is intended as a kind of an extra part of the Shema. It doesn't fit with the way we say the Shema. But the words here, the ideas here, I think are very powerful and they really resonate. Bob, you talked about this being a form of idolatry. Will you tell us more about that?
Well, that's making gods of our own comfort or power instead of recognizing an obligation to the larger whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's a really good reference, because the original passage, the one way back in Deuteronomy, what was the sin? The sin was worshiping other gods, right? If you worship God, then God will cause the rains to flow and give you enough food. If you worship other gods, then God will not give enough rain and you won't have enough food and you will get kicked out of the land. What does it mean in a modern context to worship other gods, to worship idols? None of us are worshiping, Zeus or Marduk or, the gods of the ancient pantheon. What are we worshiping? We're worshiping automation, and we're worshiping comfort. We're worshiping, as Gabriel says in the chat, money and power, right? We are worshiping our own comfort. And so I think he puts it here very beautifully. I mean, it's not a beautiful thought, but the words are beautiful. Making gods of our own comfort and power will bring about a cessation of the rain. There will not be enough rain. There will not be enough food if we continue to worship the false gods of our own comfort and our own power in these selfish ways. Ultimately, we have this responsibility to lace these words into our own passion and our intellect, and remember that we have this larger responsibility to others. And since we opened with the Shema, I'll end with the Shema as well. by way of saying that, the Shema talks about oneness. Hear, O Israel, the eternal is our God, the eternal is one. And the oneness of God in many ways is linked with the oneness of the world, of humanity and everything that lives on this planet. And there's no better way to see that oneness than to look at this Earthscape photo. When you look at the Earth from above, when you look at the Earth from outside, it doesn't look divided. It doesn't look separated. You can't see borders. You can't see, different ethnicities. You can't see languages. All you see is the oneness of everything that lives here. And if we're going to declare God's oneness every day, then I think it's incumbent upon us to remember our own oneness, and that we have this responsibility to take care of and to be cognizant of and to leave behind the best possible planet that we can leave for those with whom we share this world. So thank you everybody for your discussion. Any last thoughts or comments or questions about any of this? What are you taking away? I'll ask you, since we have a couple minutes left. What are you taking away with you on this Tu Bishvat, this birthday of the trees, to take back into the world with you? Any thoughts? Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm taking away something from my own prayer book that supports my environmental interests, which I had never found before. And I will tell the rabbi about it.
My apologies to your rabbi.
He's a good man.
Good. Bob, go ahead.
Well, this is on the same day as we had that wonderful session this morning of Tikva through text. And this is another hopeful way of looking at things, much better than everything else that you see in the news and when you look at the thermometer and the rest of it. And it really is a sense that with good thinking, unified thinking, there could be hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Of course, I mean, it's also a reminder that there's a lot that's quite wrong, right? And that we really do have to change the way that things are. But I think that this kind of thinking is hopeful thinking. And truly, changing our thinking is the first step toward changing our actions. And I'll just read what Robert wrote in the chat as well. I'm taking away religion to honor that which is bigger than me, and an appreciation that this is Jewish thought. So thank you everybody for your discussion. I wish you and all the trees a happy Tu Bishvat, and may we do what we can to help this earth, this planet, be as healthy as it can be for us and for all of those with whom we share it. Thank you and take care.